Hey everyone, thank you for watching Fit with Fallon. I'm Fallon Mercedes Brock, and today I have a very special guest. Now, November is National Diabetes Awareness Month, and I was lucky enough to spend my Friday night with Mr. Cyrus Khambatta. Now, if you haven't heard of him yet, you will know why he is so popular. He is a nutritional biochemist, is that correct?
That's right. That's right. You got it.
So that just translates to he's a very smart man, and he's also one of the owners of Mastering Diabetes, and not to mention New York Times bestseller or co-author of Mastering Diabetes. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me here today, Fallon.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I'm so excited to dive in and really talk about diabetes because I feel like there's so much misinformation. And after years of following you and learning what your company does and how it helps people, I am just so honored to pick your brain for the next however long you let me do that. So what I want people to know, if they haven't heard of you yet, is what is your story and why are you so passionate about helping others who have many different forms of diabetes?
This is a great question. It's funny because when I grew up, I was just a happy-go-lucky kid, and I was playing literally every sport under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that was because at a very young age, my mom recognized that I had more energy than she knew what to do with. So she would enroll me in like soccer and baseball and swimming and basketball and then summer camp. And she would just literally put me in everything I could possibly, any kind of sports related activity. So that by the time I got home, I was just like tired and I wouldn't bother her. Right. Mm-hmm. And this huge gift she gave me because I grew up being active and I love being active. And I continued being active all throughout, middle school, high school, and then college. Uh-huh. So senior year of college, I'm 22 years old. I'm trying to graduate. I'm trying to move on with my life. This is the year 2002. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere.
So you're like my age, in your 30s?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you're like 19. So, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, I'm like, I get like really tired. And I'm just like, man, I can't even keep my eyes open anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And what I would notice too is that I couldn't concentrate very well. And my thirst just went through the roof, right? So I'd be sitting there, I was like studying for finals, and then I'd be like, man, I'm thirsty. So I take a drink of water, put it down, and I continue studying. I was like, gee, I am thirsty. Take another drink, put it down, and I was like, I think I'm thirstier. And I just I kept this process going for like hours and hours and hours. And because I was drinking so much fluid, I would go to the bathroom like clockwork every 30 minutes. Just go, 17, 18, 20 times a day. So I picked up the phone and I called my sister and I was like, hey, Shanaz, what the heck is going on with me right now? She's a doctor. Mm-hmm. She's smart. She knows things. So I explained my symptomology to her. She cried immediately. She was like, Cyrus, stop everything you're doing. Go right to the health center right now. You have type 1 diabetes. And I was like, Shanaz, type 1 diabetes. What are you
type 1? I knew she knew, but like.
Yeah, because she paid attention in medical school. She's incredibly smart. She's the type of person, she's like a medical encyclopedia. I mean, you can, even to this day, yeah. You can go up to my sister and you can be like, hey, so patient presents to you with, this random collection of symptoms. What's the cause? And she usually just goes like, oh, okay, it's colitis. I'm like, how did you know? Right. Yeah. She's kind of like a house MD because she just knows things and she's smart and she pays attention. Right. Cool. Which is really cool. So she identified type 1 diabetes right off the bat. So I end up going to the hospital. They end up discovering that my blood glucose is in the 600s, 6 times higher than it was supposed to be.
That's crazy.
And then they started giving me a drip irrigation of insulin. And, I had IV saline going to one arm and then I had IV insulin going to the other. And they were trying to bring my blood glucose down using a small amount of insulin. So I get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And they also pieced together a complex puzzle. They were like, Cyrus, you don't have 1, but you have 3 autoimmune conditions. Are you aware? And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Wow. They're like, you have Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, which is why your thyroid gland is not making a sufficient amount of thyroid hormone. Number 2, you have alopecia universalis, which is why you lost all your hair. You have no eyebrows. You have no eyelashes, no hair, no ear hair, no nose hair, nothing. And then number 3, you have type 1 diabetes. Autoimmune, autoimmune, autoimmune.
Even diabetes is autoimmune?
Type 1 diabetes is autoimmune.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yep. it's crazy. And I was like, 3 autoimmune? I'm like, I'm 22. I'm an active guy. I pay attention to my health. I thought I ate well. Like, did I give this to myself? Is this my fault?
Yeah.
And what am I doing wrong? Tell me, like, I'll change, but no big deal. So they didn't have any answers for me. They literally were just like, they literally said, Cyrus, we've never seen a patient with these three autoimmune conditions. Can we talk about you at our next team huddle? And I was like, you can do whatever you want.
Oh, you're
Go
like,
for
great,
it.
I'm a science project.
I'm told exactly what I thought. I was like, wow, that does not give me any confidence that you guys know what you're doing. So they told me, they're like, listen, we can't tell you what to do. We don't know how to solve alopecia. We don't know how to solve Hashimoto's.
Mm-hmm.
We can't solve type 1 diabetes, but we do know that people who eat a carbohydrate restricted diet, a low carb diet, can control their glucose pretty well. Eat a low carb diet. And I was like, fine, what do I do? So they're like, here's a book with a bunch of carbohydrate values in it. Memorize it.
Yeah.
Here's a prescription for insulin, syringes, test strips, a blood glucose meter, and a Life Alert bracelet. See ya. And I was like, what? My entire life changed in front of me, just like instantly. So over the course of the first year, I was like, all right, let me do this low carbohydrate thing. And I tried to, eat turkey burgers for breakfast,
Mm-hmm.
and eggs and cheese and peanut butter and milk. And I tried to limit my intake of fruits and potatoes and rice and beans and corn, because that's what you do on a low carbohydrate diet.
Yeah.
And I was really trying to follow it well. It wasn't a ketogenic diet, because the word ketogenic didn't exist in
Back then. So it was
2003.
Atkins.
Right? Atkins existed.
Yeah.
I did not do an Atkins diet. I did like a modified low carbohydrate diet, 75 to 125 grams of carbohydrate per day, which is, as far as the research is concerned, that technically falls under the low carbohydrate umbrella.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I started eating those foods, and I thought it was supposed to control my blood glucose well, right? It's supposed to keep my blood glucose relatively stable, and it's supposed to keep my insulin use relatively stable. Did the exact opposite. My insulin, first of all, my blood glucose was a disaster. Like, I really wish I had taken pictures of my blood glucose meter at that point, because my blood glucose was like 288,
up and down.
34, 290, 27, 410. And I was just like, this is a joke. Like, this isn't even fun. You know what I mean?
No.
And my insulin use went from 25 units to 30 to 33 to 36 to 39 to 42 to 45. And before I knew it, I was like, why am I injecting so much insulin? I'm injecting more insulin and my glucose is not getting better.
Getting better.
What the heck is going on, right? So a year into it, 2003, 23 years old, I was like, all right, this low carbohydrate thing is not working. I gotta try something different.
Yeah.
So I started learning, investigating, talking, researching, reading, you name it. And I had a friend, and he was like, you should talk to Doug Graham. And I was like, who is Doug Graham? And he was like, Doug Graham is a guy. He's a raw food vegan who teaches people how to eat a raw food vegan lifestyle. And I was like, cool. How do I get in contact with him?
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up getting in contact with him, going to visit him for a week.
And
spent
where
a week with him. He runs these like week-long fitness retreats,
Mm-hmm.
and it happened to be within a month, and I went to go see him in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, Doug fundamentally changed my life, like from the ground up. I owe him so much. It's unbelievable. So within 1 week of being under his tutelage, he basically was like, all right, all this like turkey burger, eggs, bacon thing that you're eating, you're done immediately. Stop eating that stuff. Under my supervision, you will be eating lots of fruits and lots of vegetables. And that is it. And I was like, okay, but
were you scared now, because you have been told that fruit, it has sugar and it's going to make your, diabetes worse?
You hit on the head. And I turned to him and I was like, Doug, according to my endocrinologist, according to my medical team and my nutritionist, if I were to eat a bunch of fruit, I'm going to need a bunch of insulin, and then my glucose is going to go through the roof. And he looks at me, he goes, oh, really? How's that low carbohydrate diet working out for you? Didn't you come to me to try and get
true that
advice? And he's like, why are you here? If you're going to be resistant to this information, why are you here? And I was like, I'm not resistant. I'm just curious. And he's like, watch the magic unfold. Just trust me. Do you trust me? I said, yeah, I trust you. He says, just trust it. Watch. So, I mean, the first 24 hours of transitioning from a low carbohydrate diet to a, whatever you want to call it, high carbohydrate, low fat, plant-based diet, fruit-centric diet, you name it.
And you mentioned when you were doing the low carb diet, you had no energy.
None. Okay, here's how low my energy was. Cyrus growing up, lots
bouncing
of energy,
off the
running
walls,
around.
can't sit down.
Totally, just like a Hellcat, like all over the place, right? Cyrus in college, like cut that by 50%, right? And then Cyrus with type 1 diabetes after 6 months, boom, like non-existent, to the point where like I'd get up in the morning and I literally would get up on certain mornings and I was like, oh my God, I wish I was still asleep right now, because being asleep is so much easier.
And it's not like you were a college student, you know, hungover and like it was just tired, not from alcohol and partying. It was tired from getting 8 hours of sleep and still tired.
Exactly right. It was tired from something that I didn't know the answer to.
Yeah.
And, you know, clearly it was the food that I was eating. But yeah, definitely. I was doing no partying, no smoking, no drinking, none of that at that time. I was just like, I was just trying to like survive, and my energy levels seemed like they were going lower and lower and lower. So under Doug's tutelage, he basically was like, we're going to switch you over. 24 hours had gone by and my glucose started falling and falling and falling and falling and falling. I was like averaging before the retreat a glucose of like 160 to 200 all day long every day. And it didn't matter how much insulin I injected, I just couldn't get it down. Within 24 hours, my glucose was hitting 75, 70, 65, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50. And I was like, whoa. I gotta back
what
off on my
should
insulin.
a type 1 diabetic glucose should be, and what should a normal person's glucose should be?
Normal glucose, 70 to 130 within that window. If I tested your glucose anytime, any day, you'd be within 70 to 130.
Well, I'm drinking some wine right now, so it might be a little higher.
So you're probably 70 to 132 then, right? But then people with diabetes are told as a mental cutoff, they say, if you see your glucose dropping below approximately 70, 80 to 70, 70 to 80, then take evasive action. Try and get your glucose up a little bit more, because otherwise you go into hypoglycemia territory. So I was below that multiple times in a day. So I had to stop, you know, reduce my usage of insulin.
Mm-hmm.
Within 1 week, my insulin use went from 42 units a day to 25 units a day. I cut my insulin use by 40% in 1 week. But here's the kicker. I cut my insulin use by 40%, but my carbohydrate intake went the opposite direction. My carbohydrate intake went from like 100, 125 grams a day to 600 grams of carbohydrate per day. So I was eating 6 times as much carbohydrate for 40% less insulin. And I was like, why has nobody told me about this before? And Doug was like, welcome to the pharmaceutical industry. Welcome to the modern, you know, medical world, right? That's just what happens.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, there's this biological experiment, which is unfolding inside of me right now, is so dramatic and so unmistakable and so fascinating that I want to learn more. So I went back to graduate school and I went and I got a PhD in nutritional biochemistry, because I was like, I wanted to read everything under the sun. I wanted to like really study it and get inside of it so I could really understand what was happening inside of me.
So we should be calling you Dr. Cyrus.
Yeah. We're on a first name basis. But the goal here was for me to prove to myself that I was not a freak of nature. That's all I wanted to know. I was like, if I am different than everyone else around me, I want to know. But if I'm normal, and like what's happening to me could also be applicable to other people with type 1 or type 2 or pre-diabetes, I want to know. Yeah. So when I went to graduate school, I basically learned that there's the scientific world has known for 100 years, since the 1920s, how to create blood glucose instability and how to reverse blood glucose instability. In other words, the research world knows if you want to make someone have higher blood glucose, do this. And if you want to reverse high blood glucose and reverse prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, do this.
So that means the pharmaceutical company hates you.
The pharmaceutical company hates me. They can't stand me.
And your company and everything you're doing.
Absolutely right. One day I might just be taken out, and who knows, right?
I'll know why.
Yeah, go back to
I'll be
this
on your
podcast.
documentary. I know what happened. I'm just kidding. I don't want that.
No, but you're right. You're right. So when I learned this information, that the scientific world knows exactly how to create and reverse blood glucose, high blood glucose, right? But yet what the general public does is eat a low carbohydrate diet, because that's the predominant, recommendation for people living with diabetes, and even people not with diabetes.
Yeah.
The problem is that eating a low carbohydrate diet is the way to cause high blood glucose in the long term. So the scientific world basically says, don't eat a low carbohydrate diet because it causes higher blood glucose over time. And the public is like, eat a low carbohydrate diet because it lowers your blood glucose. The two of them are two separate messages. I don't know about you. I believe the research. I don't believe the public.
And I know this for a fact because I used to do keto for years, because everybody was doing it. And I'll never forget, I was like my first year into keto, and my doctor told me, your sugars or your glucose, or I should say A1C, was a little elevated, but you're fine. And when I looked into it, I'm like, no, I'm like pre-diabetic. This isn't just elevated. This is like, so that's when I kind of thought, like, this doesn't make sense. Like,
right.
I'm keto, but why is my A1C going up? It's never been this high before.
Exactly. Are you aware of a guy named Sean Baker by any chance?
No, who's that?
Okay, so Sean Baker, let me just take this sweatshirt off here. Sorry. Sean Baker is, he was like the first guy to publicize a carnivore diet. This was like, at this point, probably like 3 or 4 years ago. He went on the Joe Rogan podcast and basically made a big stink about why a carnivore diet is actually evolutionarily congruent with human physiology.
I think I've heard of people going on the carnivore diet.
Yeah. So the carnivore diet since that time has become a much bigger deal. Now, I have nothing against Sean Baker. I've actually heard from people whom I know who know him from mutual friends. He's actually a really nice guy, and that he has no ill will to humanity, right? So he's not like some egotistical, anyway, he's not an egotistical personality. Point being, he followed a carnivore diet for, I think it was 14 months. And then he got his blood work done before and after. And he, similar to the rhetoric that you hear in the ketogenic world, is that, I'm healthier. Everything is in the right direction, right? But if you actually look at his blood work, which he published online, his LDL cholesterol was significantly elevated. It was like 130 plus. His A1C was in the type 2 diabetic range. He had 6.5 A1C.
Oh, yeah.
And his fasting insulin was significantly elevated, meaning that he had prediabetes. So if you put all that together, you're like, you are at risk for heart disease. You have either prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, but yet you're telling the world that I'm healthy, I'm safe, and everything's fine, and carnivore diet is good for you. It doesn't match up. It doesn't match up at all. And
this is the problem. Just because your abs are now popping, you lost some body fat, does not mean you are healthier viscerally, like on the inside.
Correct.
And just because you're losing weight does not mean optimal health. And I think that's where people get it wrong.
100%. You hit it on the head. Absolutely agree with you. It's frustrating. Yeah. But I think it's easy to come up with the assumption that if you look good on the outside, then you're healthy on the inside. But the two of them are completely opposite. It's just not an appropriate assumption. So point being is that we were talking about eating a low carbohydrate diet. A low carbohydrate diet actually causes high blood glucose over the long term. In the short term, no, it actually controls your blood glucose very nicely, and it reduces your need for medication and insulin, which is what people experience. But if you track people over the course of time, 6 months, 12 months,
and
2
that's
years,
why after a year with me, my A1C went up, even though I lost weight and I, was okay in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me, what did your A1C start at and what did it go to?
I don't remember exactly, but it might have been 5.0 and then might have went to 5.7 or 5.9. I'm not sure. I can't remember.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
But all I know is that I wasn't in the pre-diabetic range. And I remember the doctor, she had me come back and retest because she was like, maybe you ate something, because last year's levels were not, come back again. And then I came back again and it was the same thing.
It was the same thing. Yeah, exactly. So you're like, this is not actually changing.
Yeah.
This is not working. Right. So that, I mean, basically that's the story. So now here we are, I'm 17 years into eating a plant-based diet. In other words, I've been eating strictly plant-based diet for 17 years. And my A1C values have actually been within, at the lowest of 5.4, at the highest of 6.2.
Wow.
And it's, my cholesterol is perfectly in range. My triglycerides are incredibly low. My LDL cholesterol is like a 70.
Wow.
My total cholesterol is 120. My blood pressure is in line. I'm active every single day. I go to CrossFit. I don't get sick. I mean, the list goes on.
Wow.
And so it's been a really fun process. And, I met up with Robbie Barbero, who's my co-founder.
Where's Robbie? Why isn't he on tonight?
I know, seriously.
It's okay. It's okay. I wanted to talk to you. No, I can.
Okay, we'll do it with him next time. But point being is that we met up along the way, and when we did, we realized, I was like, hey, you're like a carbon copy of, 10 years younger than me, but like had gone through a very similar process, type 1 diabetes.
Where did you meet?
Plant-based diet. We met because we both got invited to speak at a vegan, health conference. And Doug Graham, who I learned from, also taught Robbie. So Doug told Cyrus to meet Robbie and told Robbie to meet Cyrus. We're like, oh, okay, cool. That sounds good. Then we finally met each other, and I was like, you want to be best friends? And he was like, yeah, let's do it. So we met each other, ended up becoming very good friends, and then we created Mastering Diabetes with the sole explicit intent to teach people living with all forms of diabetes: type 1, type 1.5, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and gestational diabetes.
Gestational diabetes. I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's a big issue.
It's a huge issue. And so we're trying to teach people, and what we do is we teach people how to transition to a plant-based diet for optimal insulin sensitivity. In other words, to reverse insulin resistance completely. And when you reverse insulin resistance completely, then not only is your blood glucose more controllable, not only can you normalize your A1C, not only can you get off of pharmaceutical medication, not only can you lose weight and lower your cholesterol, not only do you gain energy, but your risk for chronic disease as a whole, chronic kidney disease, fatty liver disease, Alzheimer's disease, heart disease. Yeah, exactly. All of that comes down dramatically. And that's the beauty of pinpointing insulin resistance as the issue and reversing insulin resistance so that your overall health goes through the roof and you can feel like $1 million.
Okay, so for people listening who might not know the difference between diabetes and might be questioning, why are you still taking insulin? So there's a big difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2. Can you explain that for us?
For sure. There's a huge difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2. So type 1 diabetes, type 1 and type 1.5 diabetes are autoimmune conditions.
1.5?
Both of them. 1.5. 1.5. It's a version of diabetes that most people never heard of. Okay. Here's the difference. Type 1 is a autoimmune reaction which happens generally in people aged 0 to 30 years old. You're either born with it or you develop it in adolescence or childhood or upwards of being in your 20s. So between the ages of 0 and 30, that's when
you are really like dropping gems. So okay, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So autoimmune condition that impairs the ability of your beta cells to manufacture and secrete insulin. Fast, strong autoimmune reaction that puts you at full insulin dependence, meaning you go from being able to secrete insulin to generally being able to secrete 0 insulin over the course of approximately 12 to 18 months. Wow. That's a fast autoimmune reaction, okay? Type 1.5 diabetes, autoimmune, generally affects people over the age of 30. Adult onset, slow progressing, often gets misdiagnosed as type 2 diabetes,
Oh,
often gets misdiagnosed as type 2 diabetes. Often people with type 1.5 diabetes are treated as though they are type 2, and they're given oral medications, and oral medications do not work.
so what happens if you're 1.5 getting metformin when you should be getting insulin?
Yeah. Your glucose stays high. You get frustrated. Your doctor says, oh, well, metformin didn't work. Why don't we try glipizide? Why don't we try another sulfonylurea? Why don't we try Invokana? Why don't we try an SGLT2 inhibitor? Why don't we try a DPP4 inhibitor? And they just like, they throw drug after drug after drug after drug after drug. And before you know it, a lot of people with type 1.5 end up with 3, 4, 5 different medications.
Yeah.
And all of these medications are supposed to either stimulate their pancreas to make more insulin or help them decrease the absorption of carbohydrates in their intestinal tract, or improve their insulin sensitivity inside their liver and muscle. And they do minor things here and there, here and there, here and there. But the real problem is that they just don't make enough insulin because they have an autoimmune condition.
Got it. Okay.
But they were never tested for the autoimmune condition, so they don't know. So the doctor doesn't know. So they come to us and they go, oh, hey, here are my symptoms. And then we go, we know the symptomology.
Yeah,
like
we know.
Right? People describe what's happening and go, okay, great. You probably have type 1.5. They go, they get tested, and they find out, oh, yeah, I have an autoimmune antibody. One of, they could have one, they could have multiple antibodies.
So what test do you take to determine, like, so if you go to your doctor, what do you say? I need what kind of test to determine if I have 1.5?
Okay. So the most important thing you can take is what's called a diabetes antibody panel.
Okay.
They test for 5 different antibodies. These antibodies just get complex, but just for the purposes of being simple. Number 1, GAD, GADD. Number 2, ICA. Number 3, IA2A. Number 4, insulin antibody, or that was known as IAA. And number 5, ZNT8. Okay, so these are all just like complex, weird words. And they're all 5 different antibodies that you could test positive for.
You have to go to an endocrinologist, or you can go to your family physician, or? You
can go to a family physician and just say, hey, I would like a diabetes antibody panel. And they should be able to get those tests for you. If you test positive for at least one of them, then you have an autoimmune version of diabetes, period, end of story. That's a definitive autoimmune test.
Wow.
In addition to that, we also recommend getting a C-peptide test. A C-peptide is basically a test that will indicate, it gives you a good indicator of how much insulin your pancreas is capable of secreting. Your C-peptide will either come back as low, medium, or high. So if you test positive and you have one antibody at the minimum, maybe multiple, and your C-peptide value is low, what that means is that you are not manufacturing very much insulin because you have an autoimmune reaction.
Wow.
If your C-peptide is medium, that means you have an autoimmune reaction and you are likely on your way to becoming low.
Which would indicate why after 30, you would get the 1.5.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So if you kind of like put these two tests together and kind of play detective, you can determine what the right course of action is. But like we talked about earlier, treating the person with type 1.5 with oral insulin sensitizing medication is not going to work. It just doesn't work. And so what ends up happening is they get frustrated. They go, oh, something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with my body. And they get anxious and depressed and frustrated. And in reality, just like other conditions where the condition is presented, the medication doesn't solve the problem. People get frustrated, they internalize, and they go, oh, I'm the problem. I'm the problem. Maybe it's in my head. Maybe I'm not, maybe something's wrong with me. In reality, the answer is no. Your pancreas does not make a sufficient amount of insulin. That is the problem. We need to solve that problem. The way you solve that problem is by injecting insulin. You use small amounts of insulin in type 1.5. And generally speaking, the last thing I'll say about it, generally speaking, people with type 1.5 diabetes end up using very small amounts of insulin. I'm talking about 1 or 2 units of basal and maybe 3 to 8 units of bolus per day. Very small amounts.
So what is that?
Using just a small
basal.
Basal basically means 1 to 2 units of like background insulin that you inject once a day. that's just kind of like drip feeding your blood with insulin over a 24-hour period. And then mealtime insulin when you're
Okay, because
eating
you're
lunch,
probably gonna,
dinner.
yeah, I get it with the meals.
Correct. So point being is your overall insulin requirements between your background and between your mealtime insulin is very low versus someone living with type 1 diabetes like myself, who injects 25 units of insulin per day, which is physiologically very normal. It's just that 25 compared with 10 is like a little bit more than double, right?
Got it.
So that's the difference between type 1 and 1.5. Now, the question that you asked is what's the difference between autoimmune and non-autoimmune, right? So when it comes to non-autoimmune diabetes, we're looking at pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and gestational diabetes. All three of those are caused by the same thing, which is insulin resistance. Okay?
So why is it, so gestational diabetes is when you're pregnant and you get diabetes. So why is it when you're pregnant that you become insulin resistant? Or
Yeah, so it's part of the normal physiology. Usually a woman becomes insulin resistant primarily because it's a way for her body to shunt glucose towards the baby.
so
It's a
she's
simple way to think about it.
absorbing it all to protect the baby.
No, other way around. She's absorbing less, right?
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. So if you think about it as though you have a baby inside of you, you have your own body to feed with glucose from carbohydrate, and then you have the baby to feed with glucose. You put carbohydrate into your mouth, and the carbohydrate goes down into your digestive system. Your digestive system says, okay, cool, let me put this into the blood. So your digestive system puts glucose into the blood. And then once in the blood, glucose is like, tell me where to go. I'm in. You just show me where to go, and I'll go wherever. So by developing insulin resistance naturally from a normal physiological state of being pregnant, what a woman's body is basically doing is it's constructing a wall in her liver and her muscle. And it's basically saying, hey, glucose, you can come in, but in very small quantities. And the reason for that is because I don't want you coming into the mom's liver and muscle. I want you going into the baby's liver and muscle. I want you crossing the placenta to go into the baby, because if you do, that's going to help the baby grow, because that's the fuel of choice for the baby, right? And that's a good thing for the baby because it allows the baby to basically, it directs glucose towards the baby. And as a result of that, the baby can actually grow naturally. Right?
So do babies who are born from moms who have gestational diabetes, are they more likely to get type 2 diabetes then because they had so much glucose in the womb?
Yeah. Okay. So let me back up here for a second, just to make sure we're being super clear.
Okay.
If we're talking about a woman who does not have diabetes and a woman who's not at risk for diabetes, she will become slightly more insulin resistant, again, to shunt glucose towards the baby. That is perfectly normally, physiologically normal. The problem occurs when the mother has developed excess insulin resistance due to her diet. So if a woman is either sedentary or she eats a diet that's high in fat, especially saturated fat, and she develops excess insulin resistance inside of her liver and muscle beyond what is normal in pregnancy, then more and more and more glucose is shunted towards the baby and is given to the baby, and her body starts to secrete excess insulin. So glucose rises in her blood because it can't get inside of her liver and muscle. Insulin rises in her blood in order to try and do something about that glucose. And then the baby is exposed to a high glucose, high insulin environment for many months. In a high glucose, high insulin environment, what happens to a baby? Well, the baby grows and the baby gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And instead of delivering a 6.5 or 7 pound baby, you end up delivering an 8.5 or 9 pound baby, right? And as a result of that, there's a number of problems that could present itself. Number one, the baby is it grows up in an insulin resistant state in utero. And as a result of that, the baby is at a much higher risk for chronic disease when they're delivered. They're at a higher risk for weight gain. They're at a higher risk for the development of diabetes down the road. Okay. And the mom is at a higher risk for type 2 diabetes after she delivers the baby. Literally a 60% higher risk for the mom.
Wow.
After she delivers the baby. So even though gestational diabetes, technically speaking, goes away, as soon as the baby's delivered. What women don't realize, what they're not
You still have
told.
insulin resistance, probably.
Exactly. You're still insulin resistant. The conditions that were present inside of you while that baby was growing are still present inside of you. You are likely to develop type 2 diabetes unless you change your lifestyle and change your lifestyle.
Now this makes sense because after I did the keto diet for a year, my glucose A1C went up. I feel like I've struggled with weight ever since. And it's probably because I'm insulin resistant. I've never gotten tested for it. Can you get tested for it?
Can you get tested for insulin resistance? Absolutely. You certainly can. Yeah. So in the pregnancy of in the setting of pregnancy, the way that a woman usually finds out that she has gestational diabetes is because she goes to the doctor and she gets what's called an oral glucose tolerance test.
Oh yeah, that's where you drink like the glucose tablets or whatever, the sugar.
It's a glucose solution. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they monitor your glucose over 2 hours. And if your glucose goes beyond, I think in a OGTT, I got to remember, it's actually, there's no international standard for it. It's kind of frustrating depending on who you go to, whether it's the American Diabetes Association or the Australian Diabetes Association, you name it, they're all different. But the idea here is that if your glucose gets elevated, usually beyond about 160, 180, if I'm not mistaken, during a 2-hour period, then you're diagnosed with gestational diabetes.
Wow.
And even non-pregnant women and non-pregnant men can get tested, take an oral glucose tolerance test, and give them a lot of valuable information to determine whether they are also insulin resistant or not.
Got it. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So fascinating.
Type 2 diabetes then is?
Yes. So type 2 diabetes is caused by prediabetes. Prediabetes is caused by insulin resistance. In other words, you cannot become type 2 diabetic unless you were pre-diabetic. You cannot become pre-diabetic unless you were insulin resistant or unless you are insulin resistant. So it's a prerequisite. So the thing that causes insulin resistance, it's highly debated, extremely debated. You go onto the blogosphere, you type in insulin resistance into Google, you're going to get hit with multiple different philosophies. On one hand, you're going to get me telling people, oh, you should eat a plant-based diet that's low in fat because that's how you reverse insulin resistance. Then you have a whole bunch of people pointing a finger at me and saying, oh, that Cyrus guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He works for the pharmaceutical company.
But how do you work for the pharmaceutical company when you're not prescribing or suggesting medication?
People don't think very well. It's just, I don't understand that.
So how is your response to that? Like, I've seen you go head to head with the doctors, and how is your response to people in the medical community or doctors when they say, you know, your theory is wrong, where you have firsthand experience and so does Robbie?
Yeah, exactly. It's a good question. So my response to them is usually, could you please read this book?
Buy my book.
Read this book and report back to me.
People buy your book.
Yeah, you can get this book on Amazon. So it's Mastering Diabetes right here. Now, the reason I say read this book is not because I'm trying to sell more books. The reason I say read this book is because there are 800 scientific references in this book.
Wow.
I did not make up this story. I did not make up anything that I'm saying. Okay, I am literally just a puppet. I am a messenger that is telling people what the scientific community has already discovered. Okay. So when people say, well, you know, I don't see, there's not enough evidence that shows blah, 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 there's not enough randomized control trials. You're telling me there's only epidemiological evidence. And I say, read this book, because once you do, you will find out that there is very high quality evidence from many research studies over the course of the last 100 years that clearly demonstrate that a diet that is high in fat is actually the primary cause of insulin resistance. Okay. So that's really the true story, is that when you consume a high fat diet, the fat inside of your diet ends up getting inside of your blood through your digestive system. Once it's inside of your blood, it's packaged into these things called chylomicron particles. These chylomicron particles are little like vesicles that go and deliver fatty acids to tissues all throughout your body. If the fatty acids ended up only in your adipose tissue, your fat tissue, then diabetes wouldn't really be that big of a problem. Okay, because the fat tissue is exactly where fat is designed to be stored. It's the perfect enzymatic environment. It's the perfect mechanical environment to take fat from the blood and put it and keep it for long periods of time. That is exactly what fat tissue is designed to do. Okay. But what happens is that when you eat a fat-rich diet, every time you're eating a fat-rich meal, whether it's got dairy products or whether it's got too much avocados or too many nuts and seeds or olive oil or, you know, red meat, white meat, you name it.
Wait, so even healthy fats like avocados?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Okay. But even when you're consuming, so when you're eating high fat foods in general, the fatty acids from those foods get into the chylomicron particles. Those chylomicrons distribute it to your adipose tissue, but they also deliver it to your liver and your muscle. And your liver and muscle are only designed to be able to store small amounts of fatty acids. That's how they're enzymatically designed. But what ends up happening is when you're eating a high fat diet over the course of time, you eat high fat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and do it again and again and again, then tissues, namely your muscle and liver, end up getting overwhelmed with fatty acids. When they're overwhelmed with fatty acids, they have a problem. And the problem is that they're trying to block more energy from coming in because they're getting overwhelmed with too much energy. So what they do is they mount a resistance. They initiate this thing called insulin resistance, where they're like, hey, block insulin right now. Block insulin from communicating with us, because if we can block insulin, then we can block more energy from coming in. Because insulin is the master anabolic hormone in your body that's designed to get energy inside, get you know, glucose and fatty acids and amino acids inside of tissues. So by initiating insulin resistance, what that means is that insulin, when it comes and says, knock, knock, I got this glucose in the blood because, you know, Fallon just ate a banana. Can you please take up that glucose? The tissues are like, no, 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 no. It's not glucose time.
But it's not because that you ate something that was sugary or natural sugar. It's because of all the fatty stuff you were eating that shuts that door down.
Exactly. It's because excess consumption of fat-rich foods causes a metabolic traffic jam that then blocks glucose uptake. I'll say that again.
That was good. That was really
excess consumption of fat-rich foods causes a metabolic traffic jam, which then blocks glucose uptake. In other words, when you consume fat-rich foods, you create a traffic jam, and then you cannot consume carbohydrate-rich foods afterwards. That's the problem.
Which means if you have a metabolic traffic jam, you cannot burn calories or break down sugars the way you used to, which will slow down your metabolism, which will pack on weight.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So here's the problem. The reason why people who eat a fat-rich diet actually end up gaining weight is for a couple of reasons. Number one, when you consume excess fat, first of all, fat is incredibly energy dense, meaning that it contains 9 calories per gram of fat as opposed to 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate. Okay. So it's more than double its energy density. So if you're consuming a fat-rich diet, the fat is shunted towards your adipose tissue where it is stored for long periods of time. And that's okay. Okay. But in addition to that, because a fat-rich diet blocks the action of insulin, when insulin action is blocked and you eat something that's carbohydrate rich, your glucose goes up and up and up and up and up because glucose gets trapped inside of your blood because insulin cannot get it out of your blood very effectively. So when your blood glucose rises, your pancreas then responds by going, oh, I'll solve that problem. And it makes more and more and more and more and more and more insulin. Okay. So now fat created a glucose traffic jam. A glucose traffic jam causes an insulin oversecretion. And an insulin oversecretion, remember, insulin is the most potent anabolic hormone in your body, period, end of story. There's no other hormone in your body that is as powerful as insulin at promoting fuel storage and promoting tissue growth. So if you are living in a hyperinsulinemic environment, meaning that there's too much insulin in your blood, then that primes tissues to grow. So your adipose tissue divides and it grows. Your liver divides and it grows. Okay. Tissues all throughout your body divide and they grow. And as a result of that, tissues end up becoming just a little bit larger than they're supposed to be. And when your adipose tissue is constantly being signaled that there's excess insulin, excess insulin, excess insulin, excess insulin, your adipose tissue grows, which then increases the amount of body fat that you have, which then contributes to weight gain.
It's like stimulating the adipose, the fat tissues.
Exactly right. Stimulating adipose tissue growth. You got it.
Wow. This is the most intellectual conversation. I'm going to call you Dr. Cyrus from
I
now.
love it. I
Okay.
hope I'm not confusing things here too much, but
No, you're breaking it down in a way that I've personally never heard anybody break it down. Like, I am right behind you, literally taking notes.
good. I
So,
like that.
how does metformin, I guess, work in the body to get that glucose down?
Okay. Very good question. Very good question. So metformin does a number of things. Metformin increases glucose absorption. Okay. Sorry. It decreases glucose absorption in your intestinal tract. What that means is that when you eat carbohydrate rich foods, it gets inside of your intestinal tract. Metformin acts to basically say, hey, glucose, stay in the intestine. Just go into the toilet. Just go. Don't come in here. Right.
And that is what causes you to go to the bathroom all the time.
That's one of the reasons why people end up with digestive problems. That's one of the reasons, because it's affecting your digestive system. Okay. Number two, it moderately increases your insulin sensitivity inside of your muscle and liver. In other words, it moderately allows more glucose to come inside of the tissue. Okay. And as a result, and it moderately also decreases your appetite inside of your brain. Okay, so
And that, okay, so then I was going to ask you, I've heard, and you probably know so much information, know better than me. I heard there's a type 3 diabetes.
Yeah.
It has something to do with causing dementia.
Yeah. Type 3 diabetes is dementia. Type 3 diabetes equals dementia equals Alzheimer's disease. Okay. So the reason why type 3 diabetes has become a pretty hot topic in today's world is because historically, researchers have thought that Alzheimer's disease and dementia are caused by a plaque inside of your brain. In other words, a protein that has been altered and basically accumulates in certain regions of your brain that then decreases your ability to think clearly, and it decreases nerve conduction in your brain, and it causes confusion, it reduces blood flow, and it causes spatial unawareness and speech problems and an inability to remember things. That's what they've generally considered it to be, right? So what the pharmaceutical industry said was, okay, cool. If the problem is the plaque, we're going to invent some kind of pharmaceutical drug that's going to reduce that plaque accumulation. Every single drug that has ever been invented for Alzheimer's disease failed. Every single one. There is no single drug on the market that is even remotely capable of reducing your risk for the development of dementia and or Alzheimer's, or reversing either one of those. It's a massive waste of money.
Wow.
Okay. So what a small number of researchers have found, and if anybody's interested in this subject, I highly recommend learning from doctors Dean and Aisha Sherzai, otherwise spelled as Sherzai. Okay. They taught me everything I ever knew about Alzheimer's and dementia. They are literally the world's experts on this subject. And what they teach people is that your risk for dementia and Alzheimer's is not controlled by a plaque that accumulates inside of your brain that is out of your control. Your risk for Alzheimer's and dementia is controlled by predominantly your diet. It's controlled by your lifestyle. Your diet, your exercise patterns, your stress levels, how much alcohol you drink. Okay? If you can control all of those things, then you can dramatically reduce your risk for dementia and Alzheimer's disease, which are both classified as what's called cognitive decline. Okay? And it turns out, here's where the story gets interesting. It turns out,
I'm already blown away. Like, this is just like...
Good. I love it. I love it because plant-based nutrition is like the most fascinating subject I've ever learned before. So I'm glad you're into it. The Mastering Diabetes Protocol, low fat, plant-based, whole food nutrition. Okay. Again, plant-based diet, high in whole foods that is extremely rich in anti-inflammatory compounds, vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. Okay. Not packaged and processed vegan food. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay.
Oh,
Low
we'll
fat,
get to
plant-based,
that
whole food diet. Okay. when you consume a low-fat plant-based whole food diet, not only can you control type 1 and 1.5 diabetes with precision, not only can you reverse prediabetes and reverse type 2 diabetes, and yes, I said it, reverse gestational diabetes. Not only can you do that, not only can you lose weight, not only can you lower your cholesterol value, not only can you lower your blood pressure, but that is the exact recipe, it's the exact prescription for lowering your risk for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Who knew? Right?
Like,
it's unbelievable.
It's really, a plant-based diet is really the like Bible for health.
Yes, that's a great term. I like that term a lot.
It really is, because you know, every comorbidity, every disease to some degree, if you can clean up your diet to some degree, you're either going to reverse, no longer have, or just, you know, excel your health in some way.
Dramatically improve. Yep. You're absolutely right. So the one modification I would say to that is a plant-based diet is your Bible for optimal short-term and long-term health.
Yes.
Because here's the problem. The reason I say that is because in the world of ketogenic diets in particular,
Mm-hmm.
the ketogenic community is fixated, because I mean it, on short-term outcomes.
Results. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're fixated on short-term rapid weight loss,
Mm-hmm.
lower cholesterol values, which doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Okay? Lower blood pressure, lower A1C, lower fasting blood glucose. Okay, that's what they care about, and they're always worried about it. What happens now? What happens the next week? What happens the next week? If you look in the research, what you'll find is that the majority of the ketogenic experiments happen over the course of 10 weeks to 3 months. Fine, short-term results matter.
Okay.
Don't get me wrong, but long-term results are 10 times as important. And if you look at the long-term ketogenic data, what you'll find is that a ketogenic diet in the long term is a train wreck. And I do not mean that. This is not hyperbole. This is not me just saying some rhetoric. It is a train wreck, because the long-term ketogenic studies either have a very high dropout rate, like 40 to 50% of all people drop out because it is an unsustainable method of eating in the long term, or the studies that investigate diabetes in particular demonstrate that, sure, they can lower insulin use dramatically, but they lower insulin use, but their A1Cs remain elevated, and their fasting glucose remains elevated, and their C-reactive protein remains elevated, and none of those are good things in the long term. You're about to say something.
I'm sorry. I feel like a kid in class where I'm like, ooh, I gotta say something. I got a question. So now that you're bringing up the long-term effects of the ketogenic diet, so I, follow the fitness industry heavily, and recently Arnold Schwarzenegger, and there's another big fitness guy. Both of them now they're older, they're, in their 60s, and it's older, but it's still young. And they're getting heart transplants or heart surgeries. And I feel like it's because, I'm not assuming what they did to get their bodies, but what I know for sure is that they were on a heavy meat, heavy, high fat, low carb diets. And I feel like, maybe we should be studying old bodybuilders or people who've been eating a certain way for so many years, because the research is not studying, those type of diets for that long. And I swear all of them end up having some heart issues to some degree.
I'm actually glad you brought that up, because one confounding variable in the world of bodybuilding, which is rarely really talked about openly, is anabolic steroid usage.
Yeah, I didn't want to say it, but yeah.
No, yeah, let's talk about it, because it's a skeleton in the closet. Okay. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's open. He's like, I use steroids. I absolutely use steroids. And I'm not trying to deny that, right?
So wait,
a lot of other bodybuilders. No, he doesn't now. But when he was competing, right? What's that?
Is he a vegan now?
He's I don't know if he's 100% vegan, but he is heavily plant-based, because James Cameron,
Mhm.
the director, the Hollywood director, convinced him to become vegan because James Cameron is vegan. James Cameron was the guy who made the Game Changers
Yep.
movie. Arnold Schwarzenegger was in the Game Changers, and it's
Yep.
like it's a whole revolution that's happening within the professional athlete world. But what ends up happening to a lot of bodybuilders who use anabolic steroids, and even in other sports who use anabolic steroids,
Mhm.
is they develop a condition. Some of them develop a condition called LVH, left ventricular hypertrophy. Okay,
Which
don't
probably has
remember
to
that.
do with the left valve of your heart.
The left ventricle in your heart.
Okay.
Exactly. So you have the left ventricle and the right ventricle. So for whatever reason, an anabolic steroid will end up thickening the wall of your left ventricle more than the wall on your right ventricle. So what that means is that the space inside of the left ventricle chamber, when the wall gets thicker, the space gets just a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
Which is a problem, because when blood gets into the left ventricle and the left ventricle compresses that blood in order to pump it through the heart, the pressure inside of the left ventricle goes way up because it's a smaller volume, right? So you end up with a pressure imbalance inside of your heart. And that over the course of time can dramatically increase your risk for sudden cardiac failure. And I think a lot of these athletes over the course of time end up with cardiovascular issues because anabolic steroids are just like napalm, absolute napalm for your cardiovascular system. And some of these athletes who do use anabolic steroids, we've seen them. These are the guys that are just like, they're practicing basketball in the, and all of a sudden, boom, they just hit the floor and they're done.
Yeah.
Right. Or they're a football player and they're, in the middle of a training session and boom, they hit the floor and they're out. Right. Massive cardiovascular or heart attack as a result of steroid usage. So you're absolutely right. It's a great observation.
Wow. Okay. So I was telling you before the podcast, I coach kids. I'm a health coach. I do everybody, but specifically this past year, I started focusing more on kids because there's such an epidemic of child obesity. And now even children are now insulin resistant and even getting diabetes. And diabetes was not known to be, they called it adult onset diabetes for a reason, because usually adults would get it, but now children are getting it. So you probably have studied this, and do you think they're going to come out with diabetes type 4, or tell me everything you know about children and diabetes and why you think this is happening now?
Yeah. Okay. So what's a great question. What ends up happening is that children who are young end up developing type 2 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes is the type of diabetes that generally affects young kids, as we talked about earlier, right? But now there's this epidemic, literally an epidemic of young children who are developing type 2 diabetes, which is not supposed to happen. Not supposed to happen because, again, type 2 generally affects people who are older, right? But the question is, well, why would that happen in the first place? And the reason is because the exact same influences that cause insulin resistance inside of an adult cause insulin resistance inside of children. Okay, lack of activity, a diet that's high in saturated fat, excess calorie consumption. And if you put all three of those things together for a child that's 3 years old or 8 years old or 15 years old, they are just as likely to develop type 2 diabetes as you and I are, who are in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, right?
Because if you think about it, their bodies have the same biochemistries as our bodies. But the difference is now they're glued to their phones, they're glued to their laptops. They're not playing outside until the sun comes down. They're not eating the greens until they're gone off the plate. They're in, fast food waiting lines, with their parents eating, chicken nuggets and French fries and soda.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And you hit it on the head, because it's a lack of activity. It's a consumption of, fast foods, packaged and processed foods. It's a consumption of, foods that are just high in saturated fat in particular. And when you do that, I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah.
That's what happens. And it's unfortunate that that's what's happening to a large number of youth, because they don't even have a chance. It's not their fault. It's not like they grow up thinking like, I want to be eating all these foods and I want to become obese and I really want to develop type 2 diabetes. No, they don't want any of that. They want to be young and healthy and reduce their risk for chronic disease into the future. And it's just that they're, you know, the environment in which they grow up is just not suited for optimal health.
Wow. Yes.
It's fascinating.
So fascinating. I'm just like sitting here like mind blown, like just like it is crazy. Okay, so
Yeah.
I got a couple more questions. I know
Go
we've
for
been
it.
talking a lot. Maybe I could get you on for part 2 because you just have so much
Let's do it.
information. Okay, so we know keto is bad for, you know, just your health in general, never mind getting different types of diabetes and health issues. What about intermittent fasting? Do you feel that's a good thing, a bad thing, or is it good for type 2 but not type 1? How does intermittent fasting play a role in, you know, the effects on insulin?
Yeah, that's a great question because we have an entire chapter in our book about intermittent fasting and why it is so powerful. Huge fans of it. Intermittent fasting is one of the tenets of the Mastering Diabetes, method, and the reason for that is because it is an incredibly powerful technique for helping to reverse insulin resistance in your liver and muscle. So again, insulin resistance is caused by the overconsumption of dietary fat, especially if it's saturated fat. Mm-hmm. And when you perform an intermittent fast, whether it's like a 16-hour intermittent fast or a 24-hour intermittent fast, it helps to dramatically reduce the amount of accumulated saturated fat that's inside of your muscle and liver, right? And when you get rid of that accumulated saturated fat in your muscle and liver, then you end up improving your or like reducing your level of insulin resistance. Insulin begins to work more effectively, and as a result of that, you end up with a lower. You can reverse prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. In the case of type 1 diabetes, we still recommend it for people with type 1 because it's a simple way for you to be able to control your blood glucose very nicely and very evenly, and it's a way for you to test whether the amount of background insulin you're giving to yourself is actually the right amount.
Okay, so as a trainer, I personally love intermittent fasting. However, I have seen people go about it the wrong way. They'll do intermittent fasting, go to the gym, lift tons of weight, and then pass out.
Sure.
So are there any guidelines that you can give for somebody who's never done intermittent fasting, what they should and shouldn't do, if there's like a certain amount of hours or protocol, when you should do it, shouldn't do it, cut it off?
Yeah. Okay. So I like to recommend eating a 16 or performing a 16/8 intermittent fast on a daily basis. Find the people who do that end up with, it's sustainable. You can do it on a daily basis. You can really like change your lifestyle and you get phenomenal results. Okay. If you choose to do a 16/8 intermittent fast, that means you fast for 16 hours and you eat for 8 hours. Okay. My favorite would be eat between noon and 8 p.m. and then fast the rest of the time. Okay, so noon to 8 p.m. is your eating window. 8 o'clock p.m. and beyond until the next noon is your fasting window.
Now, can you work out when you are fasting? And what do you consider fasting when it comes to beverages? Can you still have coffee if it's just regular coffee? Can you still have tea, or is it strictly just water?
Okay, great question. Can you work out in the fasted state? The answer is yes, you certainly can work out in the fasted state, but you're going to have to and try it yourself. You're gonna have to experiment. Some people find that when they work out in the fasted state, that they get super lightheaded and they have no energy. Yeah. Some people pass out. Some people are just like, I can't do this. Other people find that they feel like $1,000,000. It's a very individual difference. You feel good. Yeah. Okay.
That's
great.
Like when I feel the lightest, I have the most energy. It's just if
For sure.
Stomach bouncing around, I can't.
It doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Exactly. So for some people, especially people living with diabetes, we teach them to try and actually work out during the eating period because it's hard when you're controlling your blood glucose. It could become a little bit sticky if there's no food around, and what if you go low? It can be kind of complicated. So if you're living with diabetes, do it during the fast, the eating window. if you're not living with diabetes, experiment in the fasted window. And you're probably going to be able to make whatever you want work, but you got to experiment. You have to experiment. That is the rule in the world of intermittent fasting. When it comes to beverages, as long as the beverage is non-caloric, personally, I'm cool with it. Coffee, fine. It contains caffeine. I don't care. Green tea, I don't care. It contains caffeine, not a big deal. Herbal teas, fine. No caffeine. Everything's great. Water, fantastic. As soon as you start to drink things that contain calories, like coconut water, fruit juice.
Wow, coconut water, even though it's natural.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I mean, some people would be like, come on, Cyrus, coconut water. And the reason I say no coconut water is because coconut water contains calories, right? And if you're truly trying to fast, then you're not going to be consuming any calories. But again, if you are taking 25, 30, 50 calories during your fasting window, it's fine. I'm not going to split hairs about it. But if you truly want to get the benefits of intermittent fasting, then you're going to eat 0 calories, and something like coconut water or, any other beverage that contains calories is not going to be an ideal choice.
Got it. I know I was telling you that I went vegan 3 months ago, and I struggled with my weight, with my hormones prior. And once I went vegan, I literally lost like 25 pounds in like maybe 2 months. I no longer have to work out 2 times a day. I no longer
right?
count calories.
Isn't that crazy?
And thanks to, the information that you put out there, I'm like a nerd. I watch all your videos and everything. And can you tell me why I am no longer struggling or fighting to keep the weight off, and why a plant-based diet helps, fight off insulin resistance, can help with your type 2 diabetes, and keep the weight off and lose it for good?
Yeah. Okay. This is so most people believe that what we've been trained to believe, specifically by the weight loss industry, is that the amount of food on your plate dictates how many calories are on your plate. Okay. The larger the amount of food on your plate, the more calories there's going to be. That's what everybody believes. Not everybody. That's what a lot of people believe to be true. Okay. So what that means is that if I have, let's say, this much chicken and fish on my plate, and then I add rice and beans and vegetables, and it becomes this much, now all of a sudden I'm eating more calories, right? And that's a true statement. You are, right? But if you compare this meal that contains chicken and fish and rice and beans and vegetables to the exact same size meal that contains only fruits and vegetables and rice and beans, but doesn't have any chicken, doesn't have any fish, okay? The same size meal has less calories. So the chicken and fish meal versus the same size meal that's just strictly plant food, the chicken and fish meal is going to have more calories, period, end of story, because the chicken and fish have a higher calorie density, meaning per bite of chicken, per bite of fish, per bite of dairy products, you name it, you're getting more calories than per bite of fruits, vegetables, legumes, and whole grains. Okay. So by that rationale, what that means is that when you migrate to a plant-based diet, your meals can be very large. And when I say very large, I truly mean very large, to the point where like you're eating them out of what seems like these troughs, and you're like
a big salad bowl. That's your meal.
You need like a shovel to like stick it in your mouth, right? So you're eating very large quantities of food, but yet your calorie count is not that high. In fact, your calorie count is often less than a meal that contains animal-based foods it's in a smaller quantity, right? So in other words, when you eat a plant-based diet, you can eat more for less calories. You eat more and you get less calories. When you're eating an animal-based diet, you eat less and oftentimes you get more calories, right? So that's why you end up losing weight, because you don't even know it. You're just eating. And you're like, great, I'm just stuffing my face with potatoes and beans and rice and corn and fruits and vegetables, you name it, right? And before you know it, you're like, I just lost another pound this week. I lost another 2 pounds this week. What the heck is going on? And the answer is you're eating a lot of food, but you're not actually getting that many calories, which is a good thing, right? You're not calorie starved. You're not calorie restricted. You're just eating an appropriate amount of calories. And as a result of that, you end up actually losing a little bit of weight or attaining your ideal body weight, versus when you're eating an animal-based diet and you end up eating food that ends up giving you excess calories without you even knowing it. And then you're like, how come I still have this belly? How come I still got this butt? How do I get rid of this? It's frustrating, right?
Yeah, makes sense. I also read somewhere that when you're eating plant-based foods, your body can digest it within 2 hours or so. But when you are introducing dairy and meat, it takes anywhere from 6, 8, or 10 hours to digest it. And sometimes it hangs out longer in your colon. And that's why you see so many people who consume dairy, who consume meat, have, digestive issues. They have, IBS, they're constipated. I'll tell you TMI, but once I turned vegan, I am regular, no longer have to take
regular AF.
Yeah, really. No longer have to take Sanity or certain pills, or even, probiotics. I don't even have to take them if I don't want to, because I'm getting so much fiber in my vegetables and fruits. So if you juice a vegetable or fruit, water is going to come out of it, right? I had a doctor tell me one of my podcasts, you can't juice meat, and get water out of it. So you need fiber and water to keep yourself regular. So that really stuck with me. And I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. This is why I'm more regular. This is why I'm dropping weight. You can't lose weight if you're not getting the junk out of your system.
100%. You're absolutely right. The residence time of plant-based food, or like the transit time of plant-based food, is much shorter than the transit time of animal-based foods in your diet, right? They'll just literally hang out in your digestive system for a longer period of time. They take more work. They take more time to be able to, get access to the nutrients. They take more time to break down. There's tougher collagen networks inside of them. There's tougher elastic networks inside of them. It's just literally like mechanically, it's a tougher material to rip apart and get access to the nutrients and get it out. And, because of that, they end up actually just hanging out in your digestive system for a longer period of time, which is uncomfortable and, can cause gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain, you name it.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. I read somewhere, I'm bad at memorizing research where I read it from, that if a mother consumes a lot of dairy products, and if she feeds her child under, I think it was like 5 years old or 2 years old, dairy, that they are they are more likely to get type 1 diabetes. Is that true?
That's true. It's a true statement. That's a true statement. So we got to be careful when we say this, because is the kid going to develop type 1 diabetes? The answer is no. Are they at a higher risk for the development of type 1 diabetes? The answer is yes, they are. And there's plenty of evidence-based research to show that the amino acid sequence of particular proteins inside of the cow's milk mimic the amino acid sequences on proteins on the surface of beta cells. So your immune system is mistakenly attacking and sort of degrading the proteins on the outside of your beta cells when presented with a very similar looking protein in the from milk, and that initiates the autoimmune reaction. And that's what ends up turning your immune system when in reality your immune system is supposed to be attacking, foreign, non-human antigens, if that makes sense.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So it's fascinating.
Whew, I just feel like I got the plant-based Bible, and I went to church and Pastor Cyrus was giving the sermon. I feel like the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The healthy Holy Spirit. That was good. Where's my tithing? I got to tithe.
Yeah, totally. Bring it on. Bring it on.
Oh,
thank you so much. It's been super fun.
Thank you.
Phenomenal.
That was just, I'm so blown away by all the information. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it and write down more notes. And I'm so excited for my listeners to get this information and to learn. And yeah, if you guys out there listening, you want to learn more, Mastering Diabetes, not only the book, but you have a coaching service, correct?
That's right. That's what we do is we teach people. We have a coaching platform where we transition people. We help them go from eating a non-plant-based diet to a plant-based diet. We teach them all the ins and outs and the tips and tricks to get them to that point where they can control their glucose and they can get off medication and just look and feel their best. Period. End of story. And
Yeah,
it's been really fun.
I highly suggest, even if you don't have diabetes,
Mhm.
go to masteringdiabetes.com and still dive in, because we are all affected by somebody that we love. We know somebody that where you can spread this healthy gospel, like I was saying,
So
even
true.
if you don't have it, give it to somebody else, this information. And who knows, maybe later on you might face this. Maybe as a woman, maybe when you have a kid, you might end up going through some type of gestational diabetes. So this is just so important, just to be educated. And again, this is the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, to be able to give people the tools to take back their health, to put their health back in their own hands. And by that, we interview people like you who are educated, who have experience, and just want to teach people. So I so appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, Fallon, thank you so much for having me here today. I totally appreciate it. This is, you're doing such a great job. What I love is that you're helping young children. Like it's a huge, huge, huge sort of like missing aspect, I think, in the world of health. And unfortunately, it's human nature to sort of like develop a whole collection of habits and get to a point in adulthood where you're like, if only I knew this when I was a kid, I would have changed things, right? So the fact that you're teaching young kids how to live a healthy lifestyle, makes a massive difference to their long-term health. And I truly appreciate that. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for having me on the show. It's been fun.
Okay. So your Instagram is at Mastering Diabetes. What's your personal Instagram?
I don't even use my personal Instagram.
Oh, okay. So it's just you on Mastering Diabetes.
Just go at Mastering Diabetes. And then also, if anybody's interested, pick up this book, Mastering Diabetes. You can get it at, on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. And read this. Again, if you like science, it's in here. And if you want a plan to get rid of diabetes and never have to deal with it again, it's everything. It's all in there. Yeah.
And if any of you guys want this book, let me know. I am willing to buy a couple people who comment that they want the book, and perhaps Dr. Cyrus will sign the book and write a little message.
I would love to. That'd be fun. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, so comment below. Let me know you want the book. Leave me your email address or your social media handle, and it could be a nice little Christmas present just in time for the holidays.
Perfect.
Okay, well, I appreciate you spending your Friday night with me. Maybe we can get round 2 another time.
For sure. I would love to. That'd be really fun, actually, because there's 1,000 other things we could talk about, too.
Okay, well, I'll keep in touch. And everybody watching, I hope you have a happy, healthy weekend. Spread this message to other people, and I will catch you next time on the Fit with Fallon podcast. Take care.